مشاهدينا، أهلا بكم إلى حلقة جديدة من برنامج أنا المسلم. حلقة اليوم سنستقصي فيها أوضاع المسلمين في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، كيف يعيش هؤلاء وأي دور لهم في المجتمع الأمريكي. مسألة اندماج المسلمين في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية بمن فيهم معتنقي هذا الدين في ظل تنامي ظاهرة مناهضة الإسلام في هذا البلد ضمن أنا المسلم.
السلام عليكم.
أهلا بكم من جديد. متواجدون الآن داخل السفارة الأمريكية بالجزائر. ضيفتي جون بولشيك، سفيرة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. Your Excellency, welcome and thank you for hosting us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you today, Mohammed.
Thank you. Well, before we start this interview, I'd love to invite you and our viewers to watch this report about Islam in the United States, and then we'll be right back. تسألني لماذا أسلمت وأنا الأمريكي المولود في بلد يدين معظم سكانه بالمسيحية، ونشأت في بيئة تتحدث مسيحية، أو على الأصح تتشدق بالمسيحية الأرثوذكسية على منابر الوعظ. لقد اعتنقت الإسلام لأنني وجدته بعد دراسة عميقة أفضل نظام، بل النظام الوحيد الذي يلائم المتطلبات الروحية للإنسان. بهذه الكلمات علل الأديب والدبلوماسي الأمريكي ألكسندر روسلواب سبب اعتناقه للإسلام كأول أمريكي يقدم على مثل هكذا قرار. أشهر إسلامه قبل أزيد من قرن ونصف قرن من الزمن، وبدأ في نشر هذه الديانة في أمريكا بعد استقالته من منصبه. لكن ماذا لو لا زال محمد ألكسندر روسلواب كما أصبح يلقب بعد إسلامه؟ ماذا لو لا زال على قيد الحياة؟ كيف ستكون رؤيته للإسلام في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وأوضاع المسلمين فيه؟ مكتب الإحصاء الأمريكي وفي عام 2013 تحدث عن 8 مليون نسمة. إنه التنامي المضطرد لهذه الفئة نتيجة الهجرة كسبب رئيسي، وكذلك بسبب إقبال عدد معتبر على اعتناق الدين الإسلامي. الاندماج الجيد في المجتمع يحققه المسلمون الأمريكيون الأصليون، بينما لا زال عدد من المهاجرين الجدد في بداية عهد تأقلمهم مع الحياة الأمريكية. وبين متشدد ومعتدل وعلماني هي درجاتهم في التمسك بالدين. لكن إذا كان الإسلام في أمريكا جزء لا يتجزأ، فهو من أشد الأديان تعرضاً للقمع في تاريخ الولايات المتحدة. ولعل تاريخ 11 من سبتمبر قد غير من صورة الإسلام داخل هذا البلد وفي الدول الغربية على العموم. تقرير لمنظمة التعاون الإسلامي حاول توثيق الانتهاكات المتواصلة لحقوق المسلمين في العالم، أظهر تصاعداً في العداء للإسلام والمسلمين في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية بداية العام الجاري. عداء برز في الحملات الإعلامية المكثفة التي تحذر من انتشار الإسلام في البلاد، وكذلك من خلال عدد من الحوادث التي استهدفت مسلمين ومساجد ومراكز إسلامية. في عام 2010 وفي إحدى خطابات الإفطار التي يلقيها الرئيس الأمريكي باراك أوباما سنوياً للجالية والأقلية المسلمة في الولايات المتحدة، أعلن عن تأييده بناء مسجد قرب موقع هجمات 11 من سبتمبر يسمى مسجد قرطبة. تصريح لم يقع موقع الهوى في نفوس الأمريكيين الذين يستذكرون بمرارة ضحاياهم كل عام، بل أثار الكثير من الجدل واللغط حتى ذهب بعض الجمهوريين إلى اعتبار ما قاله الرئيس مخاطرة سياسية غير محمودة العواقب. في تبريره أمام موجة الانتقادات السياسية والشعبية والإعلامية، اعتبر أوباما ذلك حقاً من حقوق المسلمين المكفولة في بلاده، استناداً إلى القانون الذي تحتكم إليه البلاد والذي يحمي جميع المعتقدات والأديان بلا تمييز، على الأقل من الجانب النظري. واشنطن تقول اليوم إنها ليست في حرب مع الإسلام، والرئيس الأمريكي باراك أوباما في خطابه الشهير بالقاهرة ذات يوم قال:
I've come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world.
فهل وجد أوباما أثراً لهذه البداية أم ليس بعد؟ والمشوار لا زال طويلاً، لأن الكلمات لوحدها لا تملك مفعول العصا السحرية.
You've officially entered the religion of Islam. All of these that you see here are your brothers, are your family members, and you have 1.8 people around the world that are also your brothers. I'll be giving you a lot of hugs, a lot of smells.
أهلا بكم من جديد. Your Excellency, Islam is the second largest religion in the United States after Christianity. It may reach 8 million people in 20 states according to the last statistics released by the Islamic organization there in the United States. Ambassador, do you think that Islam in the United States is the fastest growing religion?
Well, I think it is one of the fastest growing religions. I'm not an expert on religion, but I do know that there has been tremendous growth in the number of believers in Islam worldwide, including in the United States. And I think what's very interesting and special for Muslims in the United States is that in my country there is a fundamental, constitutionally protected right to freedom of expression and freedom of religion. And so I think this is one of the few places in the world where people can worship in the manner that they choose without any fear of interference by the state.
Yes, talking about Islam in the United States leads us to talk about the September 11th events, which maybe have changed many lives of Muslims in the United States. Muslims since then are in a position of defense. Don't you think so, Your Excellency?
I don't agree with that. I think if we look back to those really horrible days of September 2001, it was a very frightening time for everyone in the United States, regardless of their faith. And in fact, many people increasingly turn to their faith as a means to try to cope with this horrific tragedy. Unfortunately, there were some instances in the immediate aftermath of the terrorist attacks where people lashed out and perpetrated some inappropriate acts against Muslim citizens.
But Your Excellency, sorry for interrupting you, like many reports say that the Muslims started feeling like in a position of targeted after those events.
I think that there were concerns among the Muslim community about the way they would be treated. But I have to say that I think the United States government took very appropriate actions, and in fact the American people took very appropriate actions to show that we do not discriminate against people on the basis of their faith, their ethnic background, their origin, their sexual orientation. There's one thing that's very, very powerful about the United States, and that's our respect for equality for all. So in the wake of those very horrible attacks on September 11th, 2001, President Bush, for example, made a very powerful statement by going to the largest mosque in Washington, D.C. To show his solidarity with the Muslim people of the United States. And in the wake of those attacks, I think there's been a real growth in interfaith dialogue and activity. I myself personally went out to a mosque in Virginia, which is it's in one of the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and the imam there has done a tremendous job of reaching out to people and building interfaith dialogue. And he, for example, writes a newspaper column regularly in the Washington Post.
And on the other hand, Your Excellency, there are many Americans who converted into Islam just after the September 11th events. And this may be, I ask, how do you explain that? Despite all those campaigns in the States against Islam, there are many of Americans who converted into Islam.
Well, I would disagree with your premise. I think there may have been some isolated incidents of campaigns against Muslims, but in fact, I would say the American people as a whole are very respectful of religion. And in fact, this is something that dates back to the earliest days of the United States of America. For example, it was early in the 19th century, it was 1804, I think, President Thomas Jefferson negotiated a treaty here with the North African ruling powers that stated very clearly that the United States has no enmity, meaning no hatred, toward Muslims. And that's been the basis of our relation, frankly, with faiths throughout the world. So I think that from the tragedy of the September 11th attacks, there's been a growth in the number of people who are interested in Islam, who want to get to know it, and who reach out across divides. You asked, I'm sorry, yes, I wanted to make one more point. You asked about conversions in the United States. And I would note, by the way, that we have 2 Muslim members of Congress in the United States. And the first Muslim to be elected, in fact, is someone who converted while he was in university. And this was, I think, in the late 1980s that he converted.
Yeah, on the other hand, and in the same context, maybe this might be my last question in this context, Your Excellency. Muslims in the last few years, we cannot deny that they are facing a tougher life, maybe because sometimes because of Republicans and some prominent citizens misconsider the role of Muslims in the United States.
Maybe as I said, I disagree. Yeah. I disagree with your premise. Yeah. I will acknowledge that in the wake of the September 11th attacks, there were new security measures that were put in place with haste and not necessarily the same egalitarian, open-minded approach. And I think President Obama has been very clear in his statements acknowledging that there have been some cases where we went too far. And we have to keep in mind this was in terms of measures that were taken. And I look in particular at the president's statements just this year about the use of torture, for instance, in detention facilities. That was something that was absolutely opposed to the fundamental beliefs and principles of the United States of America. And President Obama acknowledged that we went too far, that was in excess, and we are taking measures now to fix that. And I think that's something that's very important about our American system. 2 things I think that are very important. One is there's a very fundamental belief in the freedom of religion and the idea that the state should play no role in governing religion. And second is that we are accountable to our people. And when the government goes too far, we take measures to fix it.
You talked about President Barack Obama, who published a column in Los Angeles Times newspaper, of course. Obama said that Muslim Americans are very important and exceptional, and their role is exceptional in the American growth. Maybe we want to know how is the contribution of Muslims in the United States, in which domains?
Well, I think you'll find Muslims in every walk of life. And again, because in our society, we don't self-identify by religion. You can have friends and neighbors and colleagues and have no idea what their faith is because it's not something that we identify. I mean, you might know where a person goes to church or mosque or synagogue, but it's not a defining identity in a way that it might be in some other countries. But so I would say that in general, Muslims across the spectrum are very involved in American society. I mentioned that we have 2 Muslim members of Congress. I know, for instance, just here in the Algerian American community, there are a number of prominent scientists. So there's no way in which your religion defines what you can achieve in the United States of America. And I think that's an important point to remember.
Yeah, in another side, Your Excellency, in the United States, there are many active Islamic institutions at the local and the national one. I'm talking about the institutions, of course, interested in Muslim. How do you see their role? How, what's the image they reflect in the United States?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, in my own hometown in Virginia, there's a mosque that's very prominent in terms of inviting people from other faiths in to come and worship with them and understand Islam. And that imam also is very active in terms of writing in the newspaper, going onto the media. Also in my hometown of Alexandria, Virginia, there's an Islamic academy. And I think this speaks volumes about the way that Americans interact with people of all faiths. There was a school that had been disbanded basically because the population was shifting and the local government no longer needed it. So the local government worked with the Muslim community there to establish an Islamic academy. It's now fully integrated into the society, students from all over the Washington, D.C. area to come. And I think it's a great example of how Muslims and anyone of any faith can easily be integrated into our society.
Yes, we're talking about reframing Muslim affairs in the United States, Your Excellency. Recently, there has been announced the foundation of the Islamic Court in North Texas. This decision, it was criticized, especially from Republicans. Maybe how to justify that?
Well, I've read about this. I personally am not a jurist. I'm not familiar with exactly what happened in North Texas. But according to what I've read in the press, this is something that was set up within the local Muslim community as a means to sort of help resolve conflicts within that local community. As long as it doesn't violate any local, state, or national law, ahlan wa sahlan. You know, we want and expect people of any faith to be able to exercise their religion in the manner they see fit.
Your Excellency, how Muslims affect politics in the United States?
How do the Muslims affect politics? Well, I have to say, and I think Professor William Quant, when he was just here in Algeria, said the same thing, or maybe it was his spouse, but the Muslim community is not organized into a very large and cohesive lobbying community.
But recently, Your Excellency, sorry, you've certainly heard about the Union of Islamic Lobby Congress, like they
which
visited
is a great initiative, and I think that's really exciting because as a whole, the Muslim community in the United States represents people from many different backgrounds and countries, and they're not necessarily speaking with one voice. So I think this is a very interesting initiative, and you know, you talked about this group and lobbying. We're a democracy in the United States, and any elected official wants to hear from the people who elected him or her. So it's really important for anyone, regardless of what their interest is, to have that contact with elected officials. The door is always open. A member of Congress always wants to hear from the people that they're serving, so I applaud this initiative.
So after this positive move, as you said, Your Excellency, is there a pro-Muslim public opinion in the United States to support those?
I think there is. As I mentioned earlier, we don't, as a country, define ourselves on the basis of faith. It's something that's, I think, uniquely American. The people who founded our country came to the United States because they were fleeing religious persecution. And I think that was the basis in many ways for this constitutional division between church and state, and this insistence that everyone must be free to worship. as they see fit. So I think that there's a lot of interest in the Muslim world. There are, so many university students now want to study Arabic. They want to learn more about Islam. And I think it's a really good opportunity to just build closer ties between the United States and people all over the world.
Ambassador, do you agree with the Newsweek newspaper saying that Muslim Americans are building an electoral and economic power which must be taken in consideration or in account?
I think they're building it. I think there's still a ways to go, as I said, because historically I think the Muslim community in the United States has been focused on their own ethnic background, origin, special interests. So there hasn't been the same sort of faith-wide organization that we're starting to see now.
Great. If you would like to say something to the Algerian audience of الشروق, of course, or the Maghrebin or the Arab Muslim audience of الشروق news.
Well, thank you. أنا أريد أن أقول كلمة بالعربية.
Okay, you can go.
So, thank you. أنا أحب شهر رمضان منذ وقت طويل. كدبلوماسية أنا أشتغلت فقط في البلد المسلمين. وطبعا كل بلد مسلمين له تقاليد الرمضانية المختلفة جدا. وأنا سعيد جدا أن أكون هنا في الجزائر لشهر رمضان لأن أريد أن أتعرف التقاليد الرمضانية الجزائرية.
إن شاء الله. مرحبا بك
مرحبا.
سعادة السفيرة.
ورمضان كريم وكل عام
وأنتم بخير.
شكرا
جزيلا سعادة السفيرة. Thank you very
شكرا.
much
صحة
for
رمضان.
hosting us. إذن شكرا جزيلا لك سعادة سفيرة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية هنا بالجزائر جون بولشيك على هذا الاستضافة.
شكرا. مع السلامة. شكرا.
مشاهدينا، بهذا نأتي إلى ختام هذا العدد من سفارة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية بالجزائر. شكرا لكم على المتابعة، ونلتقي في حلقة جديدة من أنا المسلم مع جالية مسلمة أخرى تعيش في وطن آخر لكن ترفض أن تذوب فيها.